Leadership is wrapped up in identity, but it is the identity that you share with others and that others perceive you to share with them. We have encouraged the sense of that there are leaders, either kind of great man theory like that you are literally born as a leader. In that sense, the leader is crafted by the followers.
Carl Akintola-Davies is Head of Learning and Development at ICAEW and former Head of Leadership Development at Phoenix Group. He's an award-winning expert in leadership and organizational development, and with over 20 years of experience, he helps leaders build strong culture and real impact.
It's very much a story of, the old and the new. So AI, absolutely, no one's escaping the effects of that. But then the old never goes away.
Everyone's battling with AI and technology in all organizations. I imagine that's a key part of the change.
It is. I think it's
Hi, Carl. Welcome to The Power Between.
Thank you very much, Roddy. Lovely to be with you.
It's exciting to have you on as a guest because you're currently now with the ICAEW, the Chartered Accountants.
England and Wales.
England and Wales, the Chartered Accountants Institute, in England, which is an interesting and fairly ancient body too. But I mean, prior to that, you've had different roles in different types of organisations, not least the House of Commons as well. So perhaps it would be useful if you can just give me a little bit of your version of that story of how you got to your current role and the things that have sort of inspired and that you're focused on.
In my 20s, I was a professional musician living in France and I got into teaching English as a second language. And I guess like a lot of people I've come across in my time, that was the route into L&D, being a TEFL teacher, as it used to be called in France. So coming back to England and then got into education more broadly, but also, more specifically L&D. And since then, which is a long time ago, as my grey hair will attest, I've had a number of roles and I've been quite eclectic in my choice of organizations. I've been in, very small external consultancies, kind of places like the House of Commons and King's College London, very much institutions, places like PwC, obviously a very different kind of beast. I've been in the third sector with cancer research and plenty of other bits and pieces in between. So, and as you say, now I'm heading up learning development at the ICAEW.
I'm always interested in those career journeys. When I ask that question, they always start with something that I'm not expecting, and you've just done that too. Nick Ciso, who I was talking to earlier, did scuba diving. They're not the sort of places you think. But interestingly, I mean, TEFL, I think TEFL courses are still being taught, teaching English as a foreign language. It's obviously it's a very in-person activity, and you've got to like people to do it. Well, perhaps if you discovered you hadn't, you would have gone a completely different route. So there's something interesting in that.
I suspect the common thread, if I'm honest, is performance. So that's also with being a musician, and there is a sense in which in the what is now seems very old-fashioned, teacher in a classroom, but you are on a stage of sorts and you're performing. And I think that's why certainly people from music and the arts perhaps go into education, and why people in education more broadly might find themselves in L&D, because they like that element of teaching and being at the front of a room. I suppose with time, I've come to realize that that's almost a curse, because the desire to be in the front of a room sometimes gets in the way of what's actually beneficial for the people in the room. Becomes more about you than it does about them. So that's always a watch out for me. And if I'm talking to people who, perhaps at the beginning of their career, and they say, well, I really like, training and really like telling people what to do. And so, well, okay, that has its place, but there's lots of other things to consider, particularly these days.
That journey from pedagogy to andragogy, teaching children where they don't have a huge amount of knowledge at that stage and you're giving it to them, whereas dealing with executives and adults, that almost by definition more knowledge on the class side than the teacher side, and you become more of a facilitator rather than the guru.
Yes, but still the same dangers of, I think, of it becoming, what's the phrase, of edutainment, that actually, if I'm a trainer, particularly as an external trainer, I was always aware, okay, I'm being rated on the happy sheet at the end of this. And so that incentivizes me to be entertaining and to have funny stories to tell and so on, more than it does about producing learning, which can often be hard and frustrating and not very satisfying in the moment anyway. So yeah, always a thing to watch out for that.
No, I agree with that. And part of the challenge, I think, and we see it frequently in corporate settings, is that people who are doing development, whether it's leadership development or any other type of development, end up, having to get participants to fill in a smile sheet at the end. And so you want everyone to be feeling happy and good. Whereas often, in fact, good learning requires discomfort and some form of friction. And so maintaining that balance is definitely, you don't want people to be utterly miserable or distraught, but at the same time, you want them to feel that they've had to push themselves and do something new and get out of their comfort zone. So that, there's a challenge around that. ICAEW, tell us just a little bit about that so we can have an idea of it, because my concept is that, there's the institution itself, and then there's obviously the membership, and those are two sort of different aspects. So where do you play mostly in
Yes.
in those groups?
Well, you're absolutely right. It's a very old institution, and it's a membership body. So like many membership bodies, it has members. And in this case, those members are accountants. They are accountants specifically who have taken the ACA, which is like the sort of flagship premium standard accountancy qualification. And so the institution, I guess, takes people so it focuses a lot on students. So there's a lot of students who obviously take the ACA. And so we provide all the materials and the curriculum and the support and so on for that. Those students hopefully become members, having qualified. And so we support members through ongoing CPD, but also, support in other ways. We build communities across the UK and overseas. We have a role in policy and communication. So lobbying government and other bodies to on behalf of the profession, and advising on behalf of the profession, and injecting that expertise into other areas of life. And also we have a regulatory and standards role. So ensuring that members stay on the straight and narrow, and when they don't, that we're there to help the public and support them, so that we're maintaining the reputation of the profession. And that's about 1,000 people who are involved in the institution. It's a pretty small organization, really, but supporting about a couple 100,000 members and 20, 30,000 students alongside other stakeholders. So that's our world. And me specifically, I have some interaction with the membership side, but I'm much more focused on those 1,000 people and how I can support their development.
What are the sort of the key things at this stage? Everyone's obviously battling with AI and technology in all organizations. I imagine that's a key part of what's part of the change amongst other things. But what else do?
I think it's very much a story of, the old and the new. So there's always in my world, the latest thing that's coming round, whether that be from society as a whole or, for a particular institution. And I think AI, absolutely, no one's escaping that and the effects of that. But then the old never goes away. The idea that we are basically human beings mucking along and trying to make the best of work. And that involves communication and management and all those things. And those skills are as needed now, one could argue more needed than they ever were. And so a lot of my time, certainly in the management leadership space, is on the sorts of things that are as old as the hills alongside AI.
I think that's going to become more and more the case, isn't it? That it's the human capacity that we have within organizations that will mark the success or otherwise out. The technology will develop and do whatever it needs to do in different organizations, but the people's role within that is going to be increasingly heavily dependent on individuals' ability to get others to collaborate, get people to work effectively together, and to motivate and show the purpose in why we're all working together. So, how do you see that playing out in either in organizations generally? And you've obviously been in a variety of different sectors, and I don't know whether ICAEW is doing anything hugely different in that respect to others or not.
It's playing out in terms of how management is dealt with and how management development is dealt with, or in others. Yeah, I'm a great believer that whilst people are very interested in difference and, the way that we are different from one another, and in some cases that can be very salient and very important, the way in which we are the same dwarfs the way that we are different. And as such, whether I'm at PwC or King's College London or Cancer Research or, it's the same thing. It's people trying to get, to do their best work typically, not always, but typically, and to, they come across the same challenges. And in all of his organizations, people don't like difficult conversations. They don't like giving feedback. they, management gets left behind in the day job. All of these things are things that I saw 30 years ago and I'm seeing today in every sector and every organization. So they are as old as the hills. And maybe that's some feedback for people like me, that we haven't been very successful at somehow, equipping people better, or refining our methods over the years of how we can equip people to do a better job, for example, at management.
Yeah, do you think that's the case? I have my own views about that, and I wouldn't subscribe to that view. But before I pollute you with my thoughts, what's your view on success or otherwise of the sector, not you individually?
Yeah, I think I would back that we have been, as a profession, i.e. L&D, and as business as an endeavor, are very bad at following evidence. They're very keen to take on shiny things, gurus and all the rest of it. And so that has very much hindered. And so over the years, the sort of pile of stuff that a keen and well-intentioned individual has as they enter the workplace, and they see this pile of theories and models and everything else, just gets bigger and bigger every year. I'm not sure we have served people well. Now, there are, real diamonds that come through that, and bodies of evidence that have grown, but whether they are the most salient features on this landscape, I'm not so sure. But I'm interested in your view. Tell me.
My view is that humans are in an unconstructed format, without the ability to stop and reflect and think about how we work. We're pretty brutal. We look out for number one. We push ahead. We're in that sort of warrior mode. And that's sort of genetically in most of us, to a greater or lesser degree. Some people are definitely more warrior-like than others. But when you go into an organization, that's pretty much what they're looking for as well. Organization, they're wanting people who are going to go out and get the sale, create the product, do the, and yet organizations in existence, because we know we create more because we do better when we collaborate. And we have very little focus on collaboration when we recruit people, but that happens within the organization. And so the role of L&D, leadership development people in organization, is to create that sense of collaborative work always, and greater collaboration. And that's the role that leaders need to have too, is to enhance the collaborative spirit. But I think, unlike a sort of natural science where each new generation stands on the shoulder of the giants before and can reach higher and go further, we're always recruiting from square one, where people have that sort of warrior aspect. And so you're always trying to develop that. So I think it's a perpetual battle, is my view. I absolutely subscribe that there are things that we could be doing better to get that change to happen. But the raw input that comes into that machine is always pretty unreconstructed, and it needs to be. And that's what happens in the process.
Yes, which goes to my point that people are, share much more in common than they differ.
Yeah,
one another.
exactly.
That's true across time. It is. Yeah.
I know you've got this sort of focus also around leadership identity and identity leadership, and have done work around that. Do you want to share a little bit about the thinking on that and how that impacts this?
Yeah, I mean, and in some ways it leads on from that discussion we just had, that we tend to be persuaded by things other than good evidence, as humans generally, and that's no less true than it is in this area. And so, and I'm completely indebted here to the work of Alex Haslam and Steve Reicher and others, academics who've built up a very impressive body of evidence around this. But yeah, it's just this idea of, if you compare those two phrases, identity leadership and leadership identity, or leader identity. So if we started with leader identity, this is the idea that someone has that, oh, I'm a leader, or I could be a leader, so I feel leader-like, and so I'm attracted to take on those kinds of roles. And that is in some ways an important thing to have. It's a necessary ingredient, because you do need the kind of to get from from 0 to 1 on that journey, and somebody needs to step up. But it is a thing that we've, in my view, and I think Alex would agree, over-indexed on by massively. That's to say that we have encouraged the sense of that there are leaders, either kind of great man theory, like that you are literally born as a leader, or that you are somehow different and special, and it's all about the individual. and how I feel, and leadership management development will be focused on, taking people away, taking them to a nice setting and a nice country house and big lunches and so on, and making them feel important and special and that the world rests in their hands. All of this stuff, sometimes I'm exaggerating there, but in some cases not so much.
Not too much
It's
sometimes. No,
really sort of
exactly.
puffery, Whereas actually the massive body of evidence now is in identity leadership. That's to say that leadership is wrapped up in identity, but it is the identity that you share with others and that others perceive you to share with them. So that's to say that people, broadly speaking, are more influential if the people they are trying to influence look at them, look at the leader, would-be leader, and say, yeah, they're kind of one of us. They're the sort of best version of us. I recognize that, and they are working in our interests. They're doing it for us in the language of Alex's work, and they are developing this sense of us, and they're making us matter. They're making us relevant. So, in that sense, the leader is crafted by the followers. So you are a leader just by dint of the fact there are people who are following, and that is their choice. It is the followers' choice. And so I think that was very influential in my thinking in terms about how we work with managers and leaders. And yes, there is a degree to which you need to say, as a leader, you need an identity as a leader, because that means you are different, you have certain responsibilities, etc. But mostly, we need to get senior people in the organization to realize that if they want to influence people in the organization, it is those people who will decide whether they're influenced or not, not the leader. Doing that means having a strong connection, understanding them, working for them, and making them matter in the world. And that is more of a sort of servant ethos than it is a master ethos, if I can put it that way.
And the issue, well, the challenge is that typically, stereotypically, most organizations tend to promote people with a leader identity who express that leader identity because they're looking for the promotion,
Yes.
and B, they exude that sort of confidence and capacity. Which, how in organizations does one mitigate against that then? I mean, I know that Alex Haslam did that great piece of research on a Royal Marines selection week or course, where he and his academic colleagues were observing the Royal Marines, and then some senior officers were observing them. And at the end, the senior officers selected the people they thought should become officers, and they were all the ones who had that sort of leader identity of, and when the academics went in and asked the group who they thought they should be, they had a completely different set, and that was the identity leadership sort of approach.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I that was a very stark sort of capturing of that occurring. But how can one prevent it? How can one do differently, do you think?
Well, we are very much, pushing water uphill, I think, in this respect, because these stereotypes and misunderstandings are so entrenched. I mean, one way, and I'm not sure how effective it is, but I do try, is just by trying to use examples. And one of the ones which have, if I've been successful at all, is, and I'm going to use a political example, but I'm not going to choose sides here, so it works in either direction. But if you think about someone like Donald Trump and Barack Obama, okay, and it's sticking to one, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or what, neither, doesn't matter. But if you think about, you would say that both of them are incredibly effective leaders in that they have been able to, or are able to, mobilize millions of people passionately behind a cause. You can't deny that they are both very effective. And you might say, well, okay, well, these two individuals, what is it about them? This is the typical thing. What do they have? What qualities? What traits? What could we take from them and learn and apply? For whoever your particular hero is. And the idea is, the idea that actually, when you compare the two side by side, that you could take the traits that, for example, Donald Trump has, and think that by dialing those traits up, you might get access to the people that Barack Obama inspires, is obviously a nonsense. It's the very things that he has, Donald Trump, which Barack Obama supporters, by and large, hate. And if you dial them up, you
Allergic
hate them
to,
even
yeah.
more. and vice versa. So it's not making a political point, it's vice versa. So it's obviously not about traits. It is obviously about the connection that this individual has with the people they are following. And that is as true for Obama and Trump as it is for me in the office with my 4 colleagues, that they are choosing. And so just that simple recognition that they are choosing whether or not to follow me, in a simple way or in a grander way, doesn't matter. And so I think just to sort of try and kick people out of that sense of it's all about identifying traits and then working on traits and working on weaknesses and all those sorts of things. Actually, it's much more liberating to say, no, 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 it's about understanding this group of people. And the more you seek to understand and get alongside them and show that you are working for them and you're trying to build them up and, get them to achieve goals and therefore be relevant in the workplace, that is the route through, as a matter of fact. Having said that, it's very hard work because the the number of kind of TED Talk videos and LinkedIn posts out there is just so. I mean, if I'll give you an example, you may have heard this expression: when I talk to managers, I get the feeling they're important. When I talk to leaders, I get the feeling I'm important. And that's the sort of thing, you put it on LinkedIn. I've literally seen 200,000 likes for that very post. But it's all about the sort of the leader and the individual. It's lionizing them and fantasizing about them as an individual, as opposed to something which is actually much more servant-like, if you like.
And that's fascinating. Do you think, though, that if we were to dissect Trump and Obama's approaches, and I appreciate that you're probably not actually, this isn't your your area of study, but do you think if we were to do that, we would find commonalities somewhere, things that they both do far better?
Yes, absolutely, but it's a much higher level of commonality. So what they both have in common is that they are able to do things with certain populations, clearly not with other populations,
Not the same
where
population, no.
they convince that population that they are one of them. And so in the case of Trump, although on the face of it, you might think, well, what is this kind of billionaire New Yorker? How is he able to influence these, people who are typically much more kind of, fly over state kind of people? No, it's exaggeration, but broadly
Yeah,
that's
probably.
well, that's not the identity that he's generally speaking promoting. He's promoting this other identity of being an outsider, being against the elite, and so on. So they are both very good at identity work in their own way. But that identity work happens in a context, and it's not going to work for everybody because some people just have different identities. So they are very, very good in that way, and also making people feel important, feel that they have a contribution, feel that their identity has a value. And in different ways, those two leaders will do that. So very much there are things in common, but they are different than they are both great orators, or they are both confident, or they're both tall, or what kind of nonsense you might have. Yeah.
Um, so on that basis, what can we do to get people in organizations to build up that identity leadership capacity that people will want to follow?
I mean, a good question, and a question, it's a question I've been grappling with for many years now, and
There's the Holy
unsuccessfully
Grail.
for the
Yeah.
most part. I mean, one thing that I've done more of in recent years is try to bake in to the kind of advice I'm giving in the work I'm doing people, to bake in this idea of connection. And I use the word connection rather than identity. Identity can sound, certainly in the modern it can sound like identity politics, and that's a whole rabbit hole. You don't want to take people down, or it sounds a bit academic-y. But this idea of connection is really, really key. And so, for example, working with managers in the last couple of organizations, I've used this sort of 3-word mantra, again, very kind of drawing from my political influences: connection, clarity, and progress. But starts with connection. So this idea is, if you're a manager, so going from kind of Obama and Trump right there down to, okay, I'm a manager, 5 direct reports. How do I make a difference at work? The first thing is to build a connection with those people. And that means spending time with them, typically with one-to-ones, and not only spending time with them, but shutting up and listening, asking questions, understanding what's important to them, showing that you value and respect them, which will come through those things. And that is the foundation of everything. That is always time well spent. Because if people have a trusting relationship with you as a manager, then everything else is easier. Those difficult conversations, easier. Giving feedback, easier. Everything's easier. But then there's also clarity. So that means clarity about goal, where are we heading? What are the goals? What are the priorities? What are the expectations? Clarity around, what's going on in the organization, what my plans are as your manager, what's happening around us, being clear about how you can contribute to the bigger thing. So clarity in as much as you can, how you get around the organization, how you navigate the politics. So introducing clarity. And then the last one, importantly, is progress. We're here to deliver. We're here to do stuff. And so, yeah, focusing on things which we've got a connection. We can talk honestly about what's important. Are you doing what's important? So that's coaching. It's feedback. It is, empowering people, holding people accountable, but also progress in the sense of, are you building your capability to do a bigger, better job tomorrow? So it's individual progress as well. So yeah, to answer your question, that's one thing, and I've come up with this little 3 words thing, and I've got like 4 statements beneath each one that is this, just to try and say that this is not complicated. There is a lot to think about here, but it's not that complicated, and there's good evidence that doing this stuff will over time, over cases, be helpful. And just to think, to put it in a format such that people can just remember at any one time, okay, connection, clarity, and progress. What am I doing today that is making me better connected to people? Check in with them. How are you doing? So giving them the time of day. Am I being as clear as I possibly can? And always are we focused on moving things forward, progress? But those 3 things,
Those
starting
3
with
things. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Well, we'll put that into the show notes, because I think you've got a short, a small slide around that, which would be brilliant. I mean, it seems to me that the trickiest of those 3 is the first one, the connection, because it's not necessarily what we think of when we take on these roles. The clarity is, make a false pun, is clear, really. It's obvious that you do need to have clarity. It doesn't mean that it's easy to do, but it's something that you're probably aware that you should be doing, and progress is what you get measured on, so you're aware of that. But that connection bit is a little bit hidden, I suspect, as something that needs to be done. And as you put it so well, it's the first step, it's the foundation, because if you don't do that, then the rest is not going to follow.
Absolutely, particularly in complex worlds where people are working remotely and so on. Everything relies on a trusting relationship. It relies on people sitting there at home thinking, I'm motivated to do something, in part because of my own values and my own interests and my own selfish, career ambition, whatever it may be, but in part because I've got a connection with someone who's looking out for me, who values me, and who cares about whether I do this or not, and how well I do it or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, going back to what I said, I mean, that's part of the collaboration part, isn't it? Is it sort of seeing where you all fit together, where the interaction is, and how the system requires you all to be working to a degree in tandem, in rhythm with that.
But it's easy to see as well. I mean, just to buttress your point about connection, is that if you have a world where leader identity is championed, then you tend to get people who are, confident, gobby, domineering, maybe in a good way, but, nonetheless, you're that side of the spectrum, more extrovert, more alpha, whatever your terminology is. And those people generally aren't very good at listening, asking questions, being quiet, and showing people that they have a place to play in all of this. They're and they've been promoted to manager or to leader, wherever the thing is, because they probably know more about that, been there longer. So everything is pushing in the direction of them being a big know-it-all who just has to kind of communicate. And actually, there'll be a time for that, but they can be really effective at that if the other people, only if the other people are listening. If the other people are saying, "Oh my God, here he is weighing on again about himself," then, not so great.
Yeah, I mean, you said when you were describing it originally, that the power of shutting up, the stepping back bit. I mean, leadership is a dance to a large extent, and there are moments where you need to step forward and be in the spotlight. But far more often, there's probably the time you should be stepping back and creating space and allowing room for people to do something purposeful that they feel that they've achieved, rather than being in it. And that's a really difficult concept to keep at the front of people's minds when they're leading, because there's a weight of responsibility to get stuff done, to do the progress part, and the stepping back part sort of feels like you're slowing down, I suppose, because
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
not pushing forward.
yeah. That's well put. I mean, that's
And there's
exactly right.
there's something that what organizations have you seen that do this well? And is there something specific they do well, or is it just the general culture, do you think, that has enabled it? Or is it individuals more than organizations?
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, my experience, sample of one, but my experience is it's patchy in all organizations, and that there are stellar people. I'm thinking one particular colleague I work with in my last organization, financial services, and very high powered, highly respected, but everybody she with, she left them feeling like they were important. And just everyone she gave in. But I think that is that, and she had many colleagues who were not like that at all. So I think it is, unfortunately, we're still in a space of people, for whatever reason, come to this themselves. And there are organizations which encourage this more or less. And I've worked in a recruitment firm where it's very, it's all about progress. I don't care about anything. Although they're very good on clarity about goals, but it's just driving, and it's a bit of a factory for that. So there's definitely, you'd find many fewer people there engaging in anything like connection. But yeah, mostly I'd say it's individual.
And did you feel in that organization, the financial services one, that was recognized, with her bosses aware of that approach and its effectiveness?
It's a good question, Roddy. I think that, well, I know they were. She was very one of these people who just seemed to, no one had a bad word to say against her, from the CEO, down to, you name anybody. And yet, I guess the power of, all of these stereotypes are so strong that people don't make the connection of, actually, maybe there's something here, maybe there's a link here we should be exploring. Yeah, because there were plenty of other big alpha males, humping around the place.
Who were climbing
Yeah.
up, shinning up that ladder. And I wonder, I mean, to my mind, going back to our discussion earlier, I mean, that's probably where we're failing, isn't it? We were saying that L&D hasn't made the progress perhaps it might have done over the last few decades. And I think it's that shift in mindset that we still reward the leader identity more than we probably should be, because it frequently doesn't deliver the results. Well, we see, failed leaders all over the place, and they're the people who, it's that classic book title, what got you here won't get you there, or whatever it is. Yeah.
I wonder as well, just as a brief extra point there, that something I'm always interested in when we talk about leaders is the difference between leaders in the sense that we've been talking about them largely, I think anyway, or tell me if you have a different view, which is people who inspire other people. And then there's leaders in the sense of senior people. And, they are not the same thing, both because, you get people at junior levels or all levels who will lead in different ways, and show leadership. But also crucially, people at the top of an organization have a lot of other jobs to do other than leadership of the rank and file. All kinds of things, investor relations and strategy and budget planning and, regulatory, or you name it. And so they're often very busy people. And I think that has a role as well, that people just get busier, that the higher up they get, typically. There are some exceptions, but typically that's my experience. And therefore, they're more likely to lose track of some of these things, more likely to find the time, less likely to find the time to connect than they might otherwise have done. And it takes a real strength of character and vision to be able to think, okay, I need to say no to some of this other stuff, which is important, and devote time to connection.
And I'm really glad you did flag that up, because I think that's something that doesn't get discussed enough when we talk about leaders and leadership. And the one that always really bugs me is, you hear on, particularly around political leaders, but you say, but it's about organizations that go astray for whatever reason. What we need is really strong leadership. That usually, it creates in the mind anyway, that sort of alpha male command and control, which is generally acknowledged to not be the root out of most problems. But being at the top of an organization does mean that you need to be good at that mass communication. It does mean that you've got to be good at doing strategy, which is not really that relevant in the middle of organizations. But in the middle of organizations, you've got to be really good at doing that, creating the environment for people to work well, which is probably not what's required at the top. You're sort of setting the general agenda at the top. You're not having to do the granular bit. And I think they often require two very different types of people. And we don't necessarily recognize that perhaps the people at the top of the organization who are doing strategy really well are may well not be very good at doing the middle management stuff were they tasked to do it.
Oh, typically, I find the higher you go in an organization, the worse you get as a manager, and that's typically the case. And there are some standout differences, but as in most things, in my view, mostly it's the same. And the more you go up, the worse you are. And partly that's about leader identity and all that stuff you've mentioned. Partly it's just you get busier and you get pulled into so many different things. Partly, I think there's an effect of if the more senior you get, the wider the scope you have beneath you of roles. So you're managing people ultimately who you've got no idea what they do, frankly, and that's exposing. And so you're more likely to leave them alone than you are if you're the manager of someone was doing your job. You were doing their job last year, kind of thing. So I think there are all these kind of effects that
Well, you've probably got less connection with them for a start.
and less connection, exactly, and they will feel less connected with you probably because they're a lawyer and you're a CFO or whatever it may be.
I mean, those are a lot of the challenges, the big issues that we need to tackle in terms of how one goes about creating those cultures, creating those mindsets. What is there that we can do to enable that, foster that in organizations? Or what is it perhaps that you're doing in organizations that speeds that up?
I mean, again, a big question, and I'm not sure I've got a great answer to it, but what I'm trying to do anyway, and I emphasize trying, is yes, there's a focus for education and training in whatever your medium is. We've gone on from my days as a TEFL teacher to more the many and varied ways of encouraging learning. But it's also what I would think of as organization development as well as learning development. So I tend to think of learning development as being, what can we do for the individual for them to make better choices or more effective choices, and organization development to be the kind of structure that sits around them and the environment that sits around them, which also affects what they can do. And so to have there's a place for education to help the individual, but also to be thinking about what signals is the organization sending. So that might be something very simple as, like super simple, like is the organization, does it have something like connection, clarity, and progress? Is it literally setting out what it is that they expect? Or are you just left to your own devices? Because some people, and in my experience, more than one might think, will follow. If something is clear and stated, they will follow it as best they can without any kind of educational training or prompting. It's just there, so you can get so far with just something very simple like that. And then there might be other ways in which you might embed that in the organization. So in other places we have, we've had 180 feedback with managers. So managers know that every year their direct reports are going to be asked to, give a rating and some qualitative feedback about their managers. And that will be to some degree shared up the organization. And that, people have an opportunity then to act on that feedback. And that in and of itself creates a little bit of an accountability mechanism because there's transparency and so on. And so again, that more likely to get people over the line, not because they've been skilled in any way, just because they know the light is shining a little bit more brightly on it than they might otherwise have been. So, things of those nature, trying more and more to get it into the system, into the way of working, to make sure that the performance management system and our expectations of people management are really aligned, so that it's, what I'm working on at the moment in ICAEW is making sure those are very aligned. So we're being explicit in our performance management system that, one of the core elements of people management is day-to-day of performance management is day-to-day people management. Performance management is not this kind of HR process where you have to fill in a box and write a paragraph and whatever else. It is the process of enabling performance. And that starts with day-to-day encouragement and feedback and clarity and so on. So yeah, all of those things which feed into the kind of the wallpaper of the room that the person is making their choices in.
And are you providing support on how to do that well? I mean, and if so, how is that delivered?
Yes, well, it's in the case of, for example, the performance management, it is firstly persuading the organisation, which I've hopefully just done, that this is an approach. So it's a difference of the system is different, enabling the technology to mirror that as far as possible, and then alongside that, yes, providing education and training, but also prompts and nudges and things like social proof. So you're getting videos of managers who are promoting that way of doing things on the SharePoint. All of these things which are just in the environment to show that there is a way of doing this differently, but that starts with a degree of clarity about what good looks like, and hopefully a coherent and easily memorable way of doing that.
Can you measure progress, do you think, on that, or is it sensed more than measured?
That's a whole other discussion in terms of measurement progress. I think you can. I mean, the way, as a matter of fact, that we're looking to do it for performance management is firstly by way of adoption. So I'm a big believer. I've had public discussions elsewhere on this. I'm a big believer that the world is messy, and it is very hard to evaluate outcomes in our world. But we do have good evidence for what generally delivers good outcomes. And so I think it is fair that we measure inputs as long as they are evidence-based inputs. So I think it is fair that if you are putting together an approach to people management which is evidence-based, then the adoption of those habits which are more easily measurable often, can be relied upon to say, well, this is going to be having good outcomes, because we know the evidence base generally supports that. So in terms of adoption, checking in with people systematically. Are you having check-ins with your manager? Are they giving you feedback? Do you feel that you're getting coached, etc., etc.? I think that's one way. But then also thinking about the reaction that staff have to those inputs. So do you feel that you have a connection with your manager? And again, I'm slightly relying on the evidence. If I have a strong connection, that's going to be generally better. But are there also other outcomes around delivery, clarity, progress overall in terms of business outcomes that you're delivering? But I think with the latter, you've got to be mindful that, okay, just because we've done this and that number's gone up, was there really a connection there? That's hard to say.
Yeah, I think there's a fuzziness, a messiness, as you say, around it, and so much of business generally is around judgment and assessment, and that's what we have to decide where the connection is. Carl, that's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed that. I think this bit around leader identity and identity leadership is absolutely at the core of so much of the shift that we need to make. So it's been brilliant to have a conversation with you around that. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me on, and it's been good to hear your views as well. So thank you.